Hi, this is Kelly from the Arts Council and Elevate Cape. I am here at the Cape Girardeau Police Department with Sergeant Joey Hann. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. So we find ourselves here under specific circumstances. The world seems to be paying particular attention to the role of police in the community.
Right.
And instead of sort of pushing this to the fringes, I think it's really important at this time that we start to collaborate and create conversations around what policing looks like. And the first part of that is just to find out straight from the source what it is that you guys do, what are some of the protections in place with the Cape Girardeau Police Department, some of the trainings that you guys have, so that we can, start to frame questions and conversations around this. So
Sure.
To begin, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your training and such?
Sure. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I currently serve as Public Information and Training Officer for Cape Girardeau Police Department. Prior to that, the bulk of my career was in everything from patrol, answering calls, basically, just anything that happens on the radio to, traffic, to evidence work, things like that. So
you've seen it up and down.
Yeah, pretty broad spectrum of things.
Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the trends that is happening in the United States right now, as we've seen across the news, is that yesterday in Colorado they passed an initiative that banned chokeholds and went against qualified immunity. No longer qualified immunity. In Minnesota, the city council has pledged to totally abolish the police force there and look for a community policing model. So in this, there has been sort of this hashtag Aid Can't Wait that was put out by the Campaign Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to go over some of the aspects of that and then speak to that. Would you rather that I went down the list, or do you want to kind of talk about them one by one?
You're welcome, if you'd like, just each one, or
Okay,
however you'd like to do it.
That sounds good. So let's start with banning chokeholds. What is the Cape Police Department doing about that?
So I'm a self-defense trainer. I spend thousands of dollars of my own money and thousands of man hours over the last several years. Train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling. I compete. I put myself out there as much as I possibly can because I want to have all the answers and be knowledgeable for our officers. The concept of what a chokehold is, choke is really something that happens internally, like on food. Strangulation is really the term that makes more sense.
Okay.
And in the sense that putting your arm around somebody's neck and squeezing, it can have two different effects. There's a carotid artery restraint, which affects the blood flow. Then there's strangulation, which affects the airflow. Those, in my opinion, are lethal force. They should not be used unless 100% necessary. What we do is we want to make sure we don't limit tools and resources for an officer in a life-threatening situation. And, I try to look at both sides of this debate. And, I saw an officer one time who was dealing with somebody who was holding a baby, and he could not get the baby out of the person's hands, and it was a life-threatening situation. And he put his arm around the person's neck, and his partner grabbed the baby. So in a situation like that, I'd never want to say that was wrong and that he should automatically be sued and fired and go to prison. I mean, it just has to be looked at on a basis of what the circumstances were at that time. So I really think that training each officer to understand and recognize, to be calm, to have a moment of clarity in their own head, and to realize, if I'm doing this, it means it is my last resort to save somebody's life. Sure,
and that leads sort of to the next thing, which is requiring de-escalation. What are methods to requiring de-escalation?
I'm a huge fan of de-escalation. I'm also on the SWAT team. I was the commander for quite a while, interim commander. And one thing I was talking about was, time is on our side. Distance is on our side. Mm-hmm. Verbal de-escalation is huge. Making sure that, whoever we're with, I always like to express to people, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want this to be a violent encounter. They control that as suspects a lot of times, and we don't get to control that. Now, I'll say this, with the George Floyd incident, I watched that before it became a, social media frenzy, and I was disgusted the first time I saw it, especially as a self-defense instructor. It was horrible. And I really feel like every police officer feels the same way. And de-escalation starts at the beginning. You let people know, hey, I'm here to help you. What can I do for you? We're here to provide a service. And just trying to find common grounds with people. And It doesn't work on everybody, but you'd be surprised how often that will bridge the gap and go from officer to suspect to a conversation between two people. So
yeah. So what are the kind of like methods of de-escalation? Because if you are dealing with somebody with a mental health issue or somebody who has a sort of storied history of being afraid of the police and just automatically becoming reactive, what are the methods of de-escalation?
So we're painting with a really broad brush here.
Yeah.
Because I've also gotten into, recognizing signs of autism, which is a very broad spectrum.
It's a huge spectrum.
Because you've had officers who have reacted poorly because they didn't recognize that. Mental illness, a mental health crisis. I talk about a guy one time that I caught him on the worst day of his entire life. He was having his kids taken away from him, going through eruptive wars, lost his job, and he was pretty explosive when I was dealing with him. But you got to recognize, this guy at his worst. We've got to give him time. We got to be patient. And de-escalation is really just, putting that sense of empathy out there and trying to slow things down and hoping that they don't go violent. But you still, as an officer, have to be prepared to take action if it does go violent. And it's a very thin line to walk sometimes.
Do you think that practicing a martial art that trains you in patience, is helpful with that?
100%. So, like I said, I'm a big fan of jiu-jitsu. Last night I went for 2 hours on my own time. I train our guys here. You saw our mat room that we sourced ourselves. And if nothing else, officers realize that if you're attacked, it's not a death sentence. You can calm things down. You can slow things down. You realize, hey, I've been in this situation before. I'm not going to panic. I'm going to find my way out and hopefully not hurt this person and not hurt myself. And like you said earlier, you really, hit the nail on the head when you talked about our mental health crisis. I don't want to hurt somebody that's in a mental health crisis. I want them to get the help that they can receive, be medicated, and see whoever they need to see, whatever their treatment is, and come back out of this a better person, not a worse person.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more into mental health on both ends of the spectrum, but once you get into a situation where it has escalated and the person is not responding, and you start talking about bringing something like shooting into it, the exhausting all the alternatives is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And then the warning before shooting. So those two, I think, go hand in hand, that you want to, how do you exhaust all the alternatives when you're dealing with somebody who is not responding to, sort of the de-escalation techniques?
Environment and situation really dictates tactics. So, there was a guy in a house one time with a gun, and he kept telling me that he was going to, start firing out the window at us. And I'm talking to him the entire time, trying to de-escalate things. And at this point, he wasn't a threat to public safety. Okay, if he runs out of the threshold of that front door, things change, because now he can run through the neighborhood with a firearm, and he's already talked about what his intent is, right? So as long as he's in that house, right, I don't have to escalate. I can continue to de-escalate. So a lot of times that's out of our hands, but depending on what the situation is, like I said, time, distance, having another officer. One thing that we train on a really regular basis is using 2 and 3 officers at a time to minimize force. Sometimes you watch videos and people say, why does it take 3 officers to take this person down? Well, the way that I train our guys is we wrap up their legs, we control their arms so they can't strike us, right? We don't use chokeholds, we don't lay on top of their body so they can't breathe. We put them in comfortable positions so that we don't block their airway or their blood flow. And so it's safe for them and safe for us. So we don't have to use a weapon, and we can detain them safely.
Mm-hmm. And that also is duty to intervene, that if another officer is there, you look at the case of Breonna Taylor,
Right.
This was somebody who they had already caught the guy earlier, with Louisville Metro Police, and they were going into this situation and there was more than one officer. So what type of communication are you having with the other officers aside from just training? But like in the moment, are you, how do you foster that communication where one person has one idea about what to do and somebody else is, for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe going rogue,
So I can talk on like a micro scale here.
Sure.
So with the platoon that I used to supervise, that was one thing that we touched on. If you see an officer who's getting emotionally charged with the situation, if he's getting heated, if he's getting upset, I can use an example. One of our officers, the guy was booking him in, and he knew this officer personally, and he was talking about sexually assaulting this officer's wife while he was booking him in. I could see this officer was getting upset. Tag out. I'll finish booking him in. You go somewhere else. Calm down. So it's a lot of times just recognizing that somebody's pushing these buttons. Now, if George Floyd is the conversation that we're having at this point, absolutely. Another officer, should have heard, seen, been available, been like, there's 4 of us, he's restrained. We have to fix this right now. And that should have been recognized. So in a situation like that, there's no excuse. So it's really, like you said a moment ago, communication. Officers having good communication with each other. And there's also something the public can do there. One thing that is an unpopular trend right now is for everybody to photograph and video officers while they're making an arrest. That's fine. We have no problem with that. Sometimes, though, people get so close and the camera's in their face and they're yelling aggressively. That officer has to now, the secondary officer has to watch the crowd as opposed to watching what his own officer is doing, right? So he's basically securing the perimeter. So for the public, if they just say, hey, I'm videotaping this interaction, that's fine. Give them distance and then let the officers do their job.
So would that, then, the use of body cameras would be ideal. That if we don't want to get third-party people involved in a situation, then would body cameras solve that problem, to keep those on? So
yes, we have a body camera policy here. And we really jumped ahead of the curve on that. It's making sure our officers have them active at all times during any interaction with the public, any traffic stops, citizens assist, domestic, whatever the case may be. We have certain protocols as far as documenting evidence, things like that. So really, it's accountability, transparency, it's all those things. So we have a way now, and especially me as a supervisor, if I had a member of the public come forward and say, hey, your officer did this, and it's not legal or moral or ethical, I can review that body camera and I can say, yes, that did happen, or no, that didn't happen.
Okay, so as far as, so this would be comprehensive reporting.
Yes.
So anytime that you have that information that is on there, and so anytime somebody makes a complaint, that is, if a body camera goes off, has there been an instance of that where?
Yeah, so it is, it's technology. Yeah. And as you know, technology does have its problems. Now I can tell you, we've had officers who've been assaulted and body cameras have been knocked off. And you can legitimately see on the camera where the officer's doing everything right. And that's where some communication comes in. Like when I train officers right now, if they get into a physical confrontation with somebody, we are expressing to the suspect that we're trying to detain what we're doing. Hey, we don't want to hurt you. If you put your hands behind your back, this is going to end. We just got to put you in handcuffs. Nobody wants to hurt you. So, a lot of times if you lose your body camera, keep that audio going, keep that dialogue going. Let them know you're using calming language and trying to fix the situation as opposed to trying to, up the energy in the interaction.
And I think the last part of this section is, sometimes people in the community have their own implicit bias about the use of force and things like that because they've seen, over patrolling in the community or whatever. And part of that is, goes hand in hand with weaponization, that they have a fear of how weapons are going to be used against them, whether it's tasers or guns or whatever. So, what is as far as the Cape Girardeau Police Department, do you guys have military weapons that you can use at a given time, and what would be the purpose of those weapons in our community?
So to define military weapons, it's kind of a
I know, yeah, it's a large thing. So, sometimes the government gives sort of...
Yes, I understand, yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't have any military surplus items.
Okay.
We do not. Serving on the SWAT team, we did have, automatic weapons and rifles. Most of those, like I said, are just to provide sometimes, like I said, in a hostage situation, things like that, you have to have those tools.
Sure.
That's not anything we've had to use here, thankfully. We also have less lethal munitions, which is, like the rubber rounds and things like that. Once again, that's part of our force continuum. And you talked about earlier, the reporting and transparency and things like that. Anytime that we have to even, use something like that or get something like that or point our weapon, we do a full report on it.
Okay.
And then once that's done, the supervisor takes a look at the body camera and they're saying, oh, it was justified. This officer had to pull his weapon out because the suspect said he had a gun and was going to start shooting people, or whatever the situation may be. So, we do have weapons and we do have things that people may not feel comfortable with just on sight alone, but that's a perspective we have to move past because most of that stuff is just to protect the public. Like, for instance, we have our tactical vest, and a lot of people say, you look like you're, wearing big body armor and all this other stuff. It's protective gear for us to make sure we go home safely to our families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So moving away from the 8 Can't Wait, looking at the academy and people who choose to become officers and what that training looks like. Some people are saying that you only need to be trained for 6 months before you become a police officer. And I know that there is there's undergraduate degrees in law enforcement if somebody wants to go into a specific branch. But what does the academy look like, as far as becoming a police officer and mental health, looking at mental health of police officers, looking at implicit bias testing, and looking at continuing ed. So let's talk a little bit about that. So can you tell me a little bit about what the academy looks like, how
Sure.
long it is, and some of those things?
Yeah, so Southeast Missouri State University has the Law Enforcement Academy here. It's 800 hours. That basically gets you licensed through the state of Missouri to be a police officer. Once that happens, a department must hire you on, swear you in, and then you're going to go through a field training phase through that agency as well. So that's the time that agency is going to pick up where the academy may have left off and train you on their personal policies, procedures, and things like that. After you're a police officer in the state of Missouri, we require 24 hours of continuing education every year. And that is in mental health. We have, I don't know if you know this or not, but CIT, crisis intervention training.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we're really big on right now. Actually, the state of Missouri is really setting the model for the rest of the country in that area. In this region, Southeast Missouri specifically, is well known as being kind of a flagship for creating a great program. We, between us and FCC and Children's Division and things like that, we have a great partnership so that every single agency is involved in those processes. So that's something that we train these officers on a regular basis, is like the protocols for engaging with those agencies, using all the resources to kind of help solve some of the problems in the community. Beyond that, 24 hours of the mandatory state time, I'm going to say that our officers at least double, if not triple, those hours with in-house training. And that's where that self-defense, de-escalation, things that we really work hard on with our officers to make sure that they're going out there and they're using good decisions.
So what about, things like, because it is a high stress job, and I don't doubt that some officers have PTSD from things that they've experienced and seen. Right. My two questions with regard to continuing ed, first of all, are there mental health or mindfulness continuing ed options, and are there options to, as far as continuing ed, with looking at the history of policing with people of color? That was one of the things that I thought was most interesting in kind of researching all this. Yeah. That some departments have allowed for continuing ed credits, specifically with regard to looking at police relations with people of color, so that people at least have some understanding of how those communities have interacted historically. Because I think if you have some sort of understanding, that can inform how you respond and react to people. So are there either of those options? To kind
of answer that question, we have a pretty in-depth mental health and wellness program here at Girardeau Police Department. We allow so many hours per week for officers to get physical training. It can be running, it can be jogging, it can be yoga, it can be jiu-jitsu, it can be whatever it is that they're going to do so that they have some type of creative and physical outlet. We have staff peer support, which are our own officers, who are trained basically to talk to officers about any type of health crisis they may be experiencing, any problems at home, financial problems, things like that. We actually have a health and wellness day where we have financial planners come in. We have people come in and talk about our emotional health, our physical health, taking care of ourselves, making sure that we get enough self-care and rest and things like that. So we're very proactive as far as most police agencies across the country in making sure our officers are coming to work in the right state of mind and doing their job to the best ability with nothing on the outside hindering them or causing them maybe to act erratically and negatively affecting us in the public eye.
Do you think that officers take advantage of that?
Yeah, so we encourage it. I don't want to make it mandatory because I feel like if we begin to make that mandatory, some people might see it as a burden or see it as something that they don't want to do. But we want to make sure that they always know this is the list of resources we have. We want to wipe out any negative connotation associated with them speaking to somebody, so that they can, go out without any type of guilt or, thinking, hey, I should be a tough guy and handle this on my own, and feel comfortable going out and doing that when they need to do that, and recognizing, I've been getting a little more irritable, or I'm angry lately. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about this. So we want to make it a voluntary basis, but we also want to encourage it.
So do you think that in creating a culture that supports, wellness at all the levels, do you think that kind of shifts away from this warrior police mindset and more toward a civic mindset?
Yeah, so I don't like sheepdog. That term's used quite a bit because that says we're protecting sheep, and I don't see citizens as sheep.
Who was the officer that came up with the
I don't know.
kill theory? I don't know if they...
I see a lot of the sheepdog stuff, and I just don't like it, because it's like, I think of my own family, and I'm like, they're not sheep. Those are good citizens. They're doing their role and their jobs, and I'm doing my role and my job. I volunteer at Special Olympics, and one thing they say is guardian, and I like the word guardian.
Yes.
Because I feel like that's what we are. We're just normal people who have taken upon ourselves to fill that role specifically. Doesn't mean we're better than anybody else, stronger, more of a warrior, whatever else. But then again, I don't like taking away the warrior culture. And officers, they have to be strong. They have to be mentally strong. We're held to a higher standard. So that means somebody can come and yell at us and everything else, and we're not going to react like a normal person were. We're going to remain calm. And that's part of being a warrior, in my opinion. I think you need to be educated, and you need to be able to defend yourself. Both of those two things. But you need to be a good person. And that's what we really push for everybody here. I always tell people, don't be a jerk. Don't make me defend you to the public because you're out there and you're acting like a jerk. Mm-hmm. And that's what it comes down to sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And one of the final conversations we're talking about is that there's a trend toward defunding, disbanding, police and going to more community-based projects. Now, some people would look at this as a patchwork of public safety, and from what you've said, this is looking at including social workers, working with other organizations in the community. So when you're talking about defunding and maybe rerouting some of that money into areas that if you're dealing, let's say, with a person who is homeless and you don't have the skills or the social work background to understand all the implications of homelessness, and you go and arrest somebody for digging into for trespassing, let's say, and that person then is incarcerated and can't make bail and then is a part of the system, and that kind of criminalizes poverty, So how do we look at defunding versus creating a patchwork of public safety? What does that look like here in Cape?
So I think instead of taking away from what we currently have, just a better use of the partnership amongst organizations. So what you're talking about a moment ago, Salvation Army is a great one. We've got a lot of churches here locally that help people. We have some private groups that say, hey, we have X amount of funds that we put every month, and we want you to pick and choose when you find somebody who needs a hotel, food, whatever else the case may be. So we keep a running list of these resources, and same things with what you're talking about, like domestic abuse. We try our best there. We get there, we put a Band-Aid on it, we make sure everybody's safe, but we also don't want the female or the male going back into a violent situation. So we want to make sure that we put them in contact with the Safe House, the Network Against Sexual Violence, whatever the case may be on their own situation, so that we're not just putting that Band-Aid, we're finding a solution, a long-term solution. So the issue with defunding police departments are, right now, over the course of my career, we've expanded our roles exponentially, and we need to. I'm doing medical care now. I'm giving people Narcan when they overdose on opioids.
Right.
That's a major problem. I'm acting as a healthcare provider when I go to a mental health scene, and I'm doing my best at that. And I'm not trained. I've got a master's degree in emergency management. That's a completely separate. I don't use that. I use other things for my day-to-day basis. So we've got officers who are trying their best to work all these different hats and all these different fields of expertise. And I don't think it's time to defund officers. I think it's time to do just the opposite. Up our training, up the amount of time that our officers get to experience different things and open their minds to different concepts. One thing with that 8 can't wait, there's some of those things, those policies, they're not feasible. They're great in theory, shooting into a moving vehicle, great in theory. Yesterday, a Springfield officer who I know who volunteers with Special Olympics, he's probably going to be paralyzed because he was hit by a patrol car or hit by an angry person in a car. And his partner had to shoot into the vehicle to get the person off of him because they kept ramming him into the building. So in a situation like that, I don't want the partner to think, if I open fire and save my partner's life, I'm going to go to prison for the rest of my life. Because that's a very hard decision.
But under the like pretext of qualified immunity and police unions, I think those are cases where it would be logical that somebody would say, no, this was a necessary step. So
Right.
So in the 8 Can't Wait, is there a way to promote that?
Yes.
While still kind of looking at things like maybe qualified immunity and 8 Can't Wait can go hand in hand. That if we know that an officer only has so many options, and then we look at it, then that qualifies for qualified immunity, versus this is just a sweeping thing where police officers are let off when something serious happens. So there's a balance there.
There is, sure, and I agree with that. But the problem with the 8 Can't Wait campaign is so much of it is black and white, concrete language, and when that happens, officers can find themselves, number one, limiting their ability to protect and serve and help people if they have to. I use the other example where people have used cars as weapons and driven into crowds. If an officer just stands there and says, hey, try your best to dodge the car, it's going to run out of gas sooner or later.
Sure.
But one thing you can do on the other scope of that is just say that, that an officer will not engage a vehicle with a firearm unless 100% necessary to save someone's life, protect himself, whatever the case may be, and also not put himself in harm's way. Because I've seen before where an officer jumps in front of a vehicle that's moving and then says he has to open fire to save his life. And, that's kind of a little bit of a spider web there where you're creating a dangerous situation, which is going to justify the actions that you take. So it's looking at it on a case-by-case basis, but I hate the sweeping concept of just saying this will never be allowed under any circumstance.
Sure. So if we, broaden the language, without necessarily putting in loopholes, but if we look at this as like a structure and start to talk about it and say, okay, there's the banning of chokeholds, but here are situations in which, and we start to have conversations around looking at these as kind of ideas, but then broadening it out community by community based on police input and based on, input from the community. So how do we get there? How do we start to foster these conversations and allow people in the community to get involved with what's happening in the police?
Well, I can't speak on a nationwide scale. Here, we're very proactive in that stuff. We have a citizens police experience where every year we have people go through 8 different scenarios that we experienced that year. And what you'll find is citizens that will say that I would never shoot anybody in a million years end up shooting 7 or 8 suspects throughout the day. Or they end up not pulling their gun out of their holster and getting killed while they don't protect somebody else who gets shot. So, a lot of times, and we've had a lot of pastors and people that are influential in the community that have felt a certain way about our police department who go through that and they say, that is very eye-opening. I understand now some of these concepts that you guys have talked to us about, and I understand maybe, some of the gaps in our communication between the police department and the community and things that we can do together. We always we're very transparent in what we do. We try to make sure that any type of incident we have, if it looks good for us or bad for us, we put it out there. We let the public know about it. And, we always hire an outside agency to investigate anything.
So you do have independent investigations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have our own, what we do is we do parallel investigations. We'll have our own internal affairs who will look for policy violations from our Cape Girardeau Police Department policy. Then we'll also have an outside agency, FBI, Highway Patrol, something like that, criminal intelligence, and they'll come in and they will take a look at it independently. And they're a completely separate entity. And so they'll decide whether or not there were any type of criminal violations or wrongdoings, or whether or not the officer did anything that could be held liable for in a court of law.
Is it possible to have a community-based independent panel?
Yes, very slippery slope in my opinion. So as long as you have educated people who understand the trials of police work and have a bit of experience in it, and even if they enter that platform with zero experience, as long as they're willing to come in and ride with us sometimes to see what we do, to see why we do the things that we do, I think most agencies would welcome something like that.
I mean, maybe you could have some people go through that day, have some citizens come through and experience what it is to be a police officer and start a committee of informed citizens who have chosen to go through these processes, who have ridden with you, you know, and start to develop it that way. So when is that day? I mean, that sounds really interesting, and I think that that's something that a lot of people would be interested in doing.
So the pandemic really put a drain on things. So we usually do it during the summer, and we had an opening date, which I believe was either the end of this month or early July, but we pushed it back because of the pandemic, and just it takes a lot of coordination to get this thing. But if you're welcoming and if you're interested in doing this, I would be more than happy to get your name in the process.
I will do it. I will do it. Absolutely.
It's an eye-opening. Well, it is. It's an eye-opening experience, and we're big fans of it because we try to. You know, we don't try to really just stack the deck against anybody, but we want them to see some of the like second decisions that we have. And what you said a second ago about like having stipulations of when you can use certain uses of force, I love that idea. But the problem is you also don't want the officer going through, you know, his Rolodex in his mind and saying, does this fit that criteria? You know what I mean? So a lot of that, man, it's just based on human intelligence at the time.
Well, it's also, you know, a lot of the things regarding mindfulness, you know, that if you can take a pause and learn a breathing technique, you're actually switching from the fear-based brain to your you know, prefrontal cortex, which is your higher intelligence, your decision making, all that kind of stuff, which is also why
you just nailed jiu-jitsu. That's why I love it.
I'm a yoga instructor.
So that create, like you said, that moment of clarity and calmness and stuff like that. That's why I try to tell these guys is if you're in panic mode in a physical confrontation, you're already behind. You know what I mean? You're already playing catch up, and it's going to cause you to make mistakes and overreact and things like that. And that's why I tell these guys, train. You know, try to do everything you possibly can to make sure your body and your mind are ready for any type of situation like that.
So finally, you know, there are people of color who are really hurting in our community, and I don't think they feel represented. You know, I don't know that they feel like they can reach out. So do you have anything specifically for people of color in our community who maybe feel really angry at law enforcement and are looking for answers or are looking to be recognized? What can they do? What can we do to support them through this time? You know, understanding that Black Lives Matter, while understanding that the police, you know, that law enforcement serves a specific function, and starting to really hear out both of those communities and find a middle path forward.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their own path, basically, as far as what they're going to do to deal with this. I reached out to a lot of people that I know and respect and just, you know, let them know this, what you saw in Minneapolis is not a reflection of Cape John Police Department, you know? I gotta tell you this, and I mean this, like, we do not have an officer here that I have ever detected any type of racial bias from. They're just, you know, our officers here, they truly care about everybody. And if somebody shows an ounce of that, or if that, you know, comes up to the surface, we deal with it. Like, there's a zero tolerance on that. And I feel like there always will be, and I can't speak for every other department. That's the way we feel. I don't want to work with a racist. I don't want to work for somebody or I don't want to work with someone who abuses their power. I don't want to work with a bully. You know, I teach people anti-bullying techniques. The last thing I want to do is work with somebody like that. And most of the officers across the country feel the same way. But unfortunately, we have a few that rear their ugly heads and, you know, really tarnish the badge for everybody else. And like you've probably heard it, nobody hates a bad cop worse than a good cop. And that really rings true. So anybody in the community, I mean, people I reached out to, I told them specifically, like, if you have any ideas, if you have any concepts, if you have anything you want us to do, you know, I can't give you a blanket yes to anything, but reach out to me. I'll do whatever. You know, I'll do anything we can to kind of mend some of these relationships. I want to see an end to the violence. A lot of really good people, you know, of every color and every race have been hurt during this protest. You know, Captain Dorn in St. Louis, he's another Special Olympics volunteer that we knew who was on our committee. You know, he was executed in St. Louis during the protests. And 77-year-old black male, did a ton of great stuff for his community, retired with honors, and you know, he met a very unfortunate death. And so it's like, at one point you have to look at the situation and think, we've got to come to some type of common ground, and we got to find some peace here.
Yeah. So thank you very much for taking the time to
Sure.
sit and hash this out, and I hope this dialogue can continue to be open, and, you know, maybe we can do something as a community forum just so people can hear you guys speak and, you can hear other people speak, and we just kind of create things to allow one another to just listen, because
Sure.
I think that's really important. So
Yeah.
thank you to Sergeant Joey Hann.
Joey's good.
Joey's good. And to Chief Blair and to Officer Couch, who facilitated a lot of this through a conversation. I know it's difficult. I know it's a difficult time, but we appreciate you giving us some answers.
Yeah, thank you for giving us this platform today to kind of address some of this and just have an open discussion.
Great. Thank you. We'll be talking soon.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks so much for watching, everyone. This is Kelly from Elevate Cape. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.